2 years have passed since that day, but every detail remains etched in my memory. It was the end of the school day, and I was supposed to head to my last class, history, a subject I struggled with and a teacher I couldn't stand. I had no intention of going, so I decided to skip class and hide in one of the bathroom stalls in the back of the school, where almost no one ever ventured. I chose the furthest stall, playing a game on my phone, when suddenly the principal's voice blared through the intercom, making me jump. Lockdown, lockdown. This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building, lock the door, and turn off all lights. It was a lockdown drill. I didn't pay much attention since they were usually just practice, so I stayed put in the stall. But then, the lights in the building went out all at once. The usual hum of the lights and the buzz of the AC disappeared, signaling that the power had been cut. The bathroom plunged into complete darkness, and that's when the anxiety started to creep in. The power was never turned off during practice drills. I quickly texted my friend to ask what was happening, and almost instantly, he replied, "Dude, where are you? This is a real lockdown. Everyone's looking for you." I told him I was hiding in the bathroom. He urged me to stay hidden, but I didn't know where else to go. Running out into the hallway wasn't an option, so I decided to remain where I was, in the stall. I dimmed my phone's screen and texted him again, asking what had triggered the lockdown. After what felt like an eternity, he responded, saying there was a student armed with a knife, banging on classroom doors, demanding to be let in. My classroom and the bathroom were on the same floor, so I turned off my phone and strained to listen for any sounds. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by the creak of the bathroom door. My heart pounded as I heard someone enter and move into the stall next to mine. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. Then, breaking the silence, I whispered, "Who's there?" For a moment, there was only silence, but then a voice responded, "I'm just hiding." I heard the lockdown announcement. It wasn't much of an answer, but the voice sounded like it belonged to someone my age, so I decided not to push it. We sat in silence for what seemed like hours until another announcement instructed all students to exit the school through the front doors, where police were waiting. I left the stall, but the guy next to me didn't move. I asked if he was coming, and he replied, Yeah, man, just give me a minute." It struck me as odd, but I left the bathroom and headed toward the exit. As I walked, my phone buzzed. My friend had texted me again, saying that a student, slightly older than us, had tried to rob a nearby gas station with a knife. He had stabbed a few people and then fled to our school, trying to blend in with the students, but the last part of his message chilled me to the bone. He said the cops believed the suspect was still inside the school, hiding somewhere in the back. Panic set in, and I broke into a run toward the front doors. Once outside, I frantically told a police officer what had happened in the bathroom. They searched the stall but found it empty, with the window broken. The kid had escaped through it. For the next few days, I became the center of attention, though I desperately wished I hadn't been. To this day, the suspect remains at large, and it's unsettling to think that I was hiding just a few feet away from the very person I was so desperate to avoid. I recently started my first teaching job at a public elementary school in a nearby neighborhood. It was my first year in the profession, and by September, I was still finding my footing. The challenges of being new to the job, combined with the responsibility of managing a class of about 20 first graders, made for a stressful experience. The chaos was often overwhelming, especially as I was still learning how to handle everything. One day, while I was in the middle of handing out a worksheet for simple spelling exercises, the principal's voice suddenly echoed through the loudspeaker, announcing a lockdown. Being new, I wasn't familiar with the timing of these drills, so I had no idea if this was a practice or a real emergency. But regardless, I knew I had to stick to the procedures. I quickly turned off the lights, locked the doors and windows, and instructed the kids to sit against the walls, hidden from view. Minutes of silence passed, maybe 5, when I began to hear a faint banging on doors down the hallway. My heart pounded harder as the sound grew louder, signaling that whoever was making the noise was getting closer. At that moment, I still couldn't tell if this was just the principal ensuring the doors were locked or something far more dangerous. My racing thoughts were abruptly interrupted by one of my students bursting into tears, a sound too loud to go unnoticed. The banging suddenly stopped, and then I heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching my door. The next few seconds were eerily silent until a man's voice broke through the quiet, shouting, "Hey guys, I think there are kids in here." That was when it hit me, this was no drill. The sound of more footsteps followed as multiple people began forcefully trying to break down the door. The room was filled with the cries and screams of terrified children, and I was paralyzed with fear, having never been trained for something like this. Then, 2 gunshots rang out, but they didn't come from the intruders. The police had arrived. The gunshots seemed to scare off the intruders, and I could hear them running down the hall. We remained huddled together, terrified, for what felt like an eternity until we finally received the all-clear about 30 minutes later. It turned out that the intruders were 3 local high school students. They were eventually caught, but their motives remained unclear. One of them claimed it was all just a bet, but I find that hard to believe. No one would risk their freedom for a mere dare. I'm convinced they had far more sinister intentions. Fortunately, no one was physically harmed, though the trauma of that day lingers. The shots fired by the police were later explained as warning shots aimed at the ground. Now, 2 years have passed, and I'm still teaching first grade in the same school, even in the same classroom. Yet every time I walk down the hallway, those bullet holes in the floor remind me of that terrifying day. This event took place when I was in middle school, specifically, on the very last day of it. It was late May, and as a tradition, the school organized a field day where all the students engaged in various games to celebrate the end of the academic year. I used to be quite active back then, but due to a recent concussion, I couldn't participate in any of the activities. I was bummed out, but I brought along my DS and decided to spend the day playing it in one of the classrooms since there was little else I could do. None of the teachers objected, so I found myself alone in my science classroom, engrossed in my game, while everyone else was having fun in the gym. It was strange being there alone, a feeling I couldn't quite put into words, as I don't recall ever being in a classroom completely by myself before. It's worth mentioning that the teachers who weren't supervising in the gym were across the hall in a meeting. I hadn't been playing on my DS for more than an hour when my English teacher, Miss Allen, suddenly appeared at the door, closing it from the outside without saying a word. I assumed she just wanted to keep the noise from the hallway out, so I didn't give it much thought and went back to my game. A few minutes later, the door swung open. Expecting a teacher to check on me, I looked up but was startled to see a man I didn't recognize entering the room. He appeared to be in his 50s, so I initially thought he might be a student's father. It wasn't uncommon for parents to stop by to drop off something, so I politely asked if he was looking for someone. His response was a curt no, delivered in a tone that almost sounded offended by my question. Before I could react, he started walking toward me. I asked him what he was doing, and that's when he lifted his shirt, revealing a handgun tucked into his waistband. With a chilling nonchalance, he said, "Look, kid, you're coming with me, or I'll kill you." The calmness in his voice, combined with the sight of the gun, sent a wave of terror through me. I was frozen, unable to fully grasp the danger I was in. The man grabbed my wrist and began pulling me toward the door, but just as we reached the threshold, the school's lockdown alarm suddenly blared. The noise was deafening, and in an instant, the man released my wrist and bolted down the hallway, disappearing through a back exit. I stood there, stunned, before retreating back into the classroom. I'm not sure how much time passed before Miss Allen returned. She calmly informed me that there had been an intruder in the building and that a lockdown had occurred, which was now lifted. I immediately told her about the man, and she swiftly took me to a police officer who was already on the scene. As I recounted what had happened, I learned that the man was the very reason for the lockdown. He had been lurking around the school all morning, and when someone spotted him nearing the building, the police were alerted, triggering the lockdown. The man was eventually apprehended and confessed that he had been trying to frighten children into his car to abduct them. The thought of how close I came to being one of his victims still haunts me. Not a day goes by where I'm not eternally grateful for that alarm going off when it did.